Welcome to Good Tips for Hard Times, smart people who have advice to help you get through your days. Thanks so much for joining us. So I'm Anita Sarkeesian. I'm a media critic, public speaker, and the executive director slash founder of the Games and Online Harassment Hotline, a new upcoming emotional resource for the gaming community. Now, before I introduce my guest, who is amazing and on screen already, I just want to shout out the fact that we are actually in the middle of a fundraising campaign. I know, don't roll your eyes at me. But the reason we're doing this is because 4 nonprofits are coming together that serve the games industry, and we are organizations that help with supporting mental health or promote diversity and inclusivity and creativity in the video game space. And we are coming together to try to make it through this difficult time. So if you can, and if you want to help us keep making the games industry as good as it can be, pitch in a few bucks at givebutter.com/stayinthegame. And if you can't pitch in, help us spread the word. That means a lot to us as well. Spiel over. All right. So I'm really excited about today's show because I'm joined by Cayden Mak, the executive director of 18 Million Rising. Hey, Cayden.
Hello. How's it going?
It's going. Like, I have
I know,
words.
it's such a loaded question now.
Yeah. Like, there are words. I know them. I just don't know if they're coming out in the right order. But here we are. That's all right.
All just doing our best.
We are just doing our best, aren't we? Okay, so I would love it if you would tell us, so I don't butcher it, what 18 Million Rising is. It's such a compelling title. What name of your organization? Like, what do you do? What does that mean? Tell us.
Totally. So 18 Million Rising was founded about 7.5 years ago to organize Asian Americans on the internet. And it's funny because in 2012, 18 million were the number of Asian Americans there were, but now it's more like 21, 22 million. But one of the things that we think about a lot is the fact that Asian Americans are increasingly living away from big coastal cities like New York, LA, Seattle, and the Bay. I'm in the Bay. And the way that you create sort of like neighborhoods and communities increasingly relies on the internet. And millennial Asian Americans are more online than pretty much anyone else, like racially, age-wise, whatever. And so it made sense to start taking the internet seriously as a place where we can and should be doing organizing with our folks. I think in a lot of ways are pretty unapologetic and radical about the things that we do and the approach that we take, both in terms of like the values that we're coming at our work with, but also thinking about, a lot of organizations that do sort of advocacy online are thinking about mass mobilization, but we're also thinking about things like, what does it mean to build community online, especially now, both in pandemic time and in like major platform monopoly time, and what does it take? What does it take to make people feel like they belong and are part of a real movement?
Yeah, those are big things you're trying to do, which are so important. Well, so one of the reasons we're having you on is because I was talking to my team and we were talking about what is happening to folks right now that we can address and possibly provide some resources and support around. And we just kept coming back to just the incredible surge of anti-Asian racism that's happening in this moment. It was happening right at the beginning of the pandemic and it's still going on. And so I thought that you would be a good person to come in and sort of talk about like, what does that mean? What does it actually look like right now? What can we do, whether we are allies, whether we are from the Asian communities that are feeling targeted right now. So not that go, no. So, I think I love us to start with just a little bit about like, what does it mean to, what is anti-Asian racism? How is that different than other types of racism? What does that look like for these communities?
Yeah, totally. Well, I think one of the things that's really interesting right now is that we're seeing a really big uptick in reporting on incidents of violence specifically. And I think that like the degree to which those specific incidents are like actually deeply life-threatening is something that is perhaps new for this generation. But it's not new in the history of the United States, which I think, I see a lot of comments on the internet being like, oh, well, like now the Asians know what it's like to be people of color. And it's like, y'all,
Oh.
we've been here. And I think it just speaks to the way that like Asian American history is something that like people don't learn, and like it's not any like individual's fault, but that's one of the issues at hand. And one of the things that we're trying to do organizationally is bring some of that little known history to light for people, to help them understand what's going on right now. We actually just put together this rad zine called Unmasking Yellow Peril. I have a paper copy.
Oh, cool.
But my staff put it together with Professor Jason Oliver Chang. So there's a bunch of like really awesome like archival images in it, also talking about the history of the like suppression and racism against Asians in the United States, and also how that is related to like just the foundation of our country, right? I think it's like pretty well known in a lot of circles now that like the foundation of the United States is on the sort of like unpaid labor of enslaved Africans who were brought here, right? And the theft of land from Native people. But one of the things that's interesting about the history of Asians in North America is that there are a lot of sort of historical roots and ways that those forms of violent structural oppression are related to how the United States as a country and like as a legal system related to Asians over the course of our history. The thing that a lot of people do know about is the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was a piece of immigration legislation that basically cut off all Asian immigration, all of it, for almost a century. And it basically rendered Asians living in the United States, a lot of them basically undocumented. The part of that was that there's this sort of myth, and the term yellow peril that's the name for this myth, that like Asians are these like perpetual outsiders who are simultaneously very, very clever, and also very, very deviant. Often like the source of, for instance, disease. And what's interesting is that we're living through a time where those tropes are coming back in ways that like I can't remember a time in my lifetime, I'm 33, where that's been such a like, it's been so loud, and there's been such a like kind of steady drumbeat of people sharing those kinds of memes, not in the like internet meme sense, but in the like cultural meme sense. And so to me, what we're seeing now in terms of like individual violence against Asians, in terms of our orange president talking about COVID as the quote unquote Chinese virus, it's all part of a playbook that is about stoking fears of a group of people who are perceived to be outsiders. And I think that like for a lot of Asian Americans, even, growing up, like it was very familiar to me to be like assumed to not speak English well. Things that are like very subtle and that sort of fall into this category of microaggressions, but really speak to the like persistence of these myths in our culture.
Yeah. One of the things I was thinking about with regards to all of this, I want to come back to the idea of, the Chinese virus and just how deeply racist calling it that is. But one of the things that I think comes up around specific anti-Asian racism, in addition to what you shared, is the idea of the model minority, or that like there is a level of privilege that Asian folks have that maybe other people, like groups of people of color, don't. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that means?
Yeah, totally. The model minority is actually like something, that's a like another cultural trope that really emerged, or like in response to both the like basically opening of the American immigration system to Asian immigrants, at the same time that Black communities were fighting for and winning their civil rights in the 60s. So it's interesting to see those things kind of like happen simultaneously, that you start in the middle of the 60s to see all of these laws changing um, what people have access to in the United States, and then also like laying the groundwork to change the demographics of the United States. Um, Basically, what the model minority myth says is that Asian Americans are overwhelming, like we're a very small minority, and we are overwhelmingly economically successful. We integrate well in American society. We don't do any of the like criminalized stuff that sort of like memes about Black people and Black communities are associated with. And why can't they be like us? Um, which really erases a lot of the structural things that are different between Black and Asian communities. For one thing, even though in the like late 1800s, essentially indentured Asian laborers were brought to the United States to, like, for instance, build the Transcontinental Railroad, we were never enslaved in the sort of like same systematic structural way that Black communities were. Even though we also experienced redlining and stuff like that in terms of buying homes, especially here. I just remember when I moved to Oakland, there's this neighborhood here called Rockridge, and it's like the houses there are so cute. Like they're the cutest houses. And I just remember somebody like on Twitter about a year after I moved here found this ad from when they were first building the houses in Rockridge in, like, I want to say the 20s, and the ad was like, new neighborhood, super nice houses, great for young families. We don't sell houses to Black people, Chinese people, or Japanese people. And you're like, whoa, all right. So, it's not that stuff didn't exist.
I mean, at least they didn't just say Chinese people, trying to use that as the catch-all for all Asian. I'm sorry, that was such a horrible joke. I was like, oh, you recognize Japanese people? Okay, cool.
Yeah, no,
Jesus, that's horrifying.
Kind of shocker.
Ooh, boy.
But so that kind of redlining did happen. Yeah. But I think that like the ways in which like multiple generations of Black communities in this country have been like not just exploited, but like systematically stolen from is like structurally different than the Asian experience in the United States, where since the 60s, you see most Asian immigrants, a lot of Asian, can't even say necessarily most, but a lot of Asian immigrants coming here because they have the financial means to. And so you're looking at a community that already has like a different access to wealth, different conditions of arrival. And for that reason, like different relationship to both like wealth, education, than a lot of our Black counterparts, and that's just like really real, right? The comparison is one of apples to oranges because of these structural reasons that like I think our society likes to ignore or even cover up because it's honestly embarrassing. Sure. And so the reason that the model minority myth is a myth is like Asian communities are set up structurally differently than Black communities in the United States, and it doesn't make sense to make a strict comparison. But at the same time, that myth is also used to kind of scapegoat Black communities to be like, why can't you guys be more like the Asians? They shut up, they work hard, they send their kids to college. And I think that there's also this sort of strain of like counter argument to that also like plays into like these sort of like problematic ideas about what Asian culture is, right? That's like we're this kind of like that like drifts in the yellow peril direction of like we care more about the collective than the individual and stuff like that, which is like not universally true for all Asian cultures, and is like some weird like it like drifts into that like territory of like we're this like faceless mass that's coming to get you, and we're like better at technology and smarter than your kids.
Yeah. Well, and this is making me think a bit about so this is not unique to Los Angeles, but Los Angeles has a very deep history of the Black community and the Asian communities here being pitted against each other or having some adversarial relationships towards each other, which, you know, are both manufactured and internalized and is very complicated. And so like, and this isn't unique, you know, we're talking specifically about Black communities, but the pitting of racial marginalized identities against each other so that like really white supremacy can stay in power is not new. It's just, it's very prominent in those two communities, I think. Or
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that like there is a thing with Asian Americans and specifically East Asians about our proximity to whiteness, right? Like the fact of the matter is like we're light skinned and colorism is a thing. You know, there's like a lot of ways in which I think like the historical and roots of like East Asian economic power also are related to this, where like, you know, like China, Japan, and South Korea are perceived now as, you know, like big economic players. There are ways that like sort of like world geopolitics also play into the way that we perceive each other.
yeah.
It's a weird thing to think about, but it's true.
No, totally. And that actually brings up another point that I think is important, that when we talk about Asian identities, we do often think of a very particular visual, right? Like we do think of a particular region. We often erase like Indians from Asian identity or that category, for example, or folks just outside of Southeast Asia, for example. And you know, and so when we're talking about the increase of anti-Asian violence or racism, I'm assuming that a lot of it is related at people, Chinese folks and Japanese folks and Korean folks, for example, or people who are perceived as looking a certain way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and you know, to sort of like speak from the like this transnational perspective, the other thing that's happening in, for instance, India is like Indian Muslims are being scapegoated for coronavirus by their Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who is a Hindu fascist. So this sort of like racial scapegoating of the other, whoever the other might be in your particular country, is not unique to the United States. And I think like in moments of crisis, demagogues like Trump and Modi are very likely to like lean on stuff like that. And to take a transnational perspective, I think that there are foreign policy agenda items that also play into this, right? That like Donald Trump's conflict or like desire to create conflict with China precedes the coronavirus crisis, right? Like he ran on this in some part in 2016. And this has been a part of like US political discourse for a while, that China is this like big threatening superpower that is coming for us all and is going to eclipse the United States if we don't do something to protect our people. So, you know, like one of the things that I think a lot of that I'm trying to really draw out here is that these are long threads, that like, while there's this increase in specific interpersonal violence, this is not a new phenomenon. And like, we've been seeing it.
Yeah, I think that's a really critical point. I think in most of the work that activists do is trying to get folks to understand our history and understand that usually when we're at these sort of apex moments, society has been building to this moment, right? So I'm glad, you know, you started this conversation with talking about the yellow peril myth. And I think that is the ways that myth is played out culturally, especially in our pop culture, to propagate that myth has created real harm. And, you know, what does that mean for right now? Like, let's bring it back to what is happening with the current pandemic and how it's affecting these communities. Like, even the president refusing to acknowledge that calling COVID-19 the Chinese virus is deeply racist. And when he's been called out on it, he won't even admit it, right? And giving millions of people permission to continue using that term.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that's very real for a lot of people now is like every week we're seeing like a new video or story about some really heinous act of violence against a sort of unsuspecting Asian person. Um, I won't tell you to go out and find this video because it's traumatizing.
Yeah.
But this week, a video was leaked of, this group of kids who like basically like jumped this little old Asian lady on the street, and the person holding the video camera was egging on his friends, who were like kicking her when she was on the ground. And it's like, that shit's real, right? Like it's happening. And I think that like while over the past several years, like it does happen that like uh, Asians, both East Asians and South Asians, right? Because um, there was a huge spike in this kind of like interpersonal violence after 9/11 for the South Asian community. Um, have been like, you see these kinds of incidents now and then, like the frequency and the like intensity of them um, has just really like been kicked up several notches. And I think that like, you know, one of the things that we've seen with Donald Trump in office and like saying the like barely dog whistle racist things that he says is that people looking for an outlet for things that they've maybe secretly believed and not felt like they could share, because they know that they're fucking bigoted. Can I swear?
Yeah. That's fine.
are finding the cover in our culture to now like act on those things in ways that they might not previously have. And it does, like, you do hate to see it, but like it is also the case that like other communities of color are coming at Asian Americans also. Like I think when, as human beings, like when we're hurting and when we're hard up, it is really easy and kind of instinctive to like try and find a reason for that and somebody to take that out on. Unfortunately, it's not the solution.
Yeah.
Like it's never the solution.
No, of course not.
Um,
Of course not. So, increase in violence, and also like I would categorize verbal slurs and attacks in that category of increases in violence. And I imagine this is taking place both online and in person, across the board. Are there other things that are affecting, specifically pandemic related, affecting Asian communities?
oh, there's so many things.
I think you mentioned like unemployment at one point is
Yeah.
a big one right now.
A number that was released last week is that in Asian American communities, the unemployment rate has increased 6,300%.
Whew.
I mean, I don't even know how to like, that doesn't compute for me. It's like one of those like absurdly high numbers that I'm like, what does that even mean? But I think it is still the case that a lot of the majority of Asian Americans are still self-employed, right? Like they run restaurants, they run stores. Those folks are largely out of work. And it's really,
Wow.
it's a big problem.
Yeah.
The other thing is this week we've been seeing a lot of reports coming out on the number of Filipino American healthcare workers who are dying disproportionately on the front lines because they tend to be nurses, right? Like this is also with like a structural thing that was set up by our immigration system where the United States is in need of healthcare workers, especially like nursing and like skilled nursing assistants. And bringing folks in from abroad is like one way to meet that need as our population ages. And the number of these like immigrant nurses from places like the Philippines, they're working really hard. They're supporting their families back home, and they're dying of coronavirus, and it's really, really heartbreaking.
Wow. All right. So it's a lot. How Okay. I am badly transitioning us into like, what do people do? So one of the things I did want to bring up right before we get into this is I love that on the 18 Million Rising website you have a list of operating principles that are very robust and detailed, and I love it. And in it you talk about co-conspirators instead of allies. And allies is probably the term that our audience is most familiar with, but it can be kind of loaded for a lot of people. So why have you chosen the word co-conspirators as a synonym for that, for allies?
For us, I think thinking about ourselves as co-conspirators is about understanding that in order to address a lot of this injustice that we are interested in fighting, we need to take a good, long, hard look at the power that we have, right? And I think that like there's a level on which it's like good and useful to think about the power that you have and how to leverage it to like fight for systemic change. But then the level beyond that to me is like, what is the power that I'm willing to give up to? Because there will come a point in the fight for justice, if we're winning, that like you have to make that call, and you have to sort of square with the fact that in order to have that power differential and that difference in access or influence, somebody else has to have less. And in order to equalize things, you might have to give something up. So to me, co-conspiratorship is really about being like in deep community with people, being willing to be in principled struggle with people, because like we're not going to get this all right all the time, right? And allyship to me implies that like I have something to give, but that's it, right? Whereas co-conspiratorship is like we're comrades in a really real way.
Which I really like that because it acknowledges power. I think too often when we talk about racism, injustice, sexism, we forget that power is at the root of a lot of these things. And so it recenters that in this conversation, and it makes us acknowledge our power. It's also a lot more intersectional in that like you might be an ally in one way, but you might also be oppressed in another way. And so I thank you for sharing that. I am going to try to integrate that into my vocabulary now. So what are some things that co-conspirators can do right now to support communities, or not get in the way, or get in the way if as needed?
Yeah, well, there are things that you can do both online and offline. I think one thing that's really important is online is like, don't let people get away with calling coronavirus the Chinese virus unchecked. I actually think it's really important for folks who have a lot of non-Asian friends to be like making that intervention in Facebook threads, on Twitter, and just being like, hey, that's not what this is called. It's a racist because it like scapegoats a group of people and is, pointing to this uptick in interracial violence, is like, this is not coincidence, and our words mean things to people, right? Like that on a very basic level, that's something that all of us can do. And I think it's especially incumbent on like non-Asian people to like poke their friends who are also non-Asian to be like, it's actually really not cool for you to like read this meme from our orange president. The other thing offline, and I think this is like obviously a much higher risk thing, is Hollaback and the Asian Americans Advancing Justice. We're co-sponsoring a series of gender intervention trainings. And gender intervention is the kind of thing that it's really hard to do, but the more practice you get in like role playing, in training, and like preparing yourself mentally for the moment where it becomes useful, the better you're going to be at doing it, right? Like even if you have gone through a bystander intervention training before, I think that this is a great time to do it again and really think about like, in this particular moment, are there new triggers that you should be looking for out in the world to be like, can I on behalf of somebody else? And bystander intervention, I think that a lot of times we think of it as literally fighting a Nazi. But sometimes it's actually just like redirecting some energy in a room, right? It's like showing in public that somebody who is physically by themselves is like not alone, and that you're watching, right? Like bystander intervention doesn't need to be this like like weird, like aggressive thing. It can actually be about like more about care work than it is about like getting into fistfights.
Yeah, I recently did the hollaback intervention specifically just a few weeks ago, actually, and it's really good. I highly recommend it, and it does talk a
Cool.
lot about what you're mentioning, that there are so many ways to intervene that aren't like physically putting your body in the way or calling people out, and I think they do a great job. And I'm sorry, I totally forget the organization that they partnered with. Uh,
Yeah, Asian Americans Advancing Justice.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So yeah, I highly recommend it if folks are interested. They're doing those for free right now for folks, and the link is in the chat now.
I think there's four. Basically, they're doing one a week for the entire month of May. So there are tons of opportunities. They're completely free. Invite all of your friends, because again, the more people that know about these tools to like deflect, to de-escalate, and change the situation, the better equipped we as a society will be. I also think that like relatedly to that, in terms of like putting together networks of people who are ready to take action, my friend Mia Mingus, who is one of the founders of the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective, has been doing a lot of free training. And actually, she just sent me an email like last night being like, I'm doing some more free trainings. You may have seen drifting around on the internet this worksheet called pod mapping. And pod mapping is really useful for this stuff. Basically, the idea of pod mapping is that you sit down and think about like who your ride or dies are, like who you would call an emergency, and like really prepare for that. Again, a lot of this is about pressing the skills and tools that we need, that I actually think are like long-term, like society transforming tools that start with the like personal relationships that you and I have with one another.
Yeah. I love that. We talked, it's very related to what we talked about last week with Lee Honeywell of Tall Poppy, in the digital space. How to stay safer online is we didn't call it pod mapping, but that's adorable, of like building your support community and building it now before things get bad so that you have somewhere to go if there is a need for it and folks are prepared to help in those situations. So yeah, expanding that concept into all of these different spheres of our lives.
Yeah, totally. I just found the link, but it looks like chat is not letting me post it.
Okay, I just actually put it up on this for us.
Excellent.
One of our mods will let that come through. We blocked off the ability to post links to anyone other than mods for reasons. Speaking of digital safety.
Yep.
Yeah, and so, one of the other things you talked about was unemployment and how a lot of Asian folks own their own businesses. I'm thinking about like Asian supermarkets right now. Maybe we could go shop at them.
Yeah,
it's not a structural change, but it might be an individual way that we can contribute.
Yeah, and like low key, I sort of like don't want to give out this, but these little immigrant-owned markets are not sold out of anything.
This is what I've heard.
Yeah, so like here's like a way that you can practice what my friend Sasha Wijiratni calls selfish solidarity, because a lot of these stores, for the like racist reasons you might imagine, are struggling to actually find the customers to buy the food in their toilet in their stores. So, patronize those businesses.
Yeah.
Their customer bases are drying up because of a combination of the economic impact of coronavirus on Asian communities and straight up racism. So, don't tell anybody that I told you this, because I might get some shit, but
you can blame me. I also heard that from other folks. So yeah. And also really good food. Like you get all, like, just saying. Oh, I think May have lost Cayden briefly. Hang on. Hello, that everything.
Comcast, like, they don't like it when I talk about racism on the internet.
Yeah, there's a lot we can say about Comcast. Thank you, everyone, for being with us just through that. Okay, so I wanted to take some questions from the audience, if my computer will cooperate. Wow, I have the beach ball of death. This is just, I kind of love that the quarantine has just made it so everyone just rolls with this. Like, we know things are just not going to be their best, and that's for the best right now, you know? All right. There was a question.
Everybody's trying matters.
They really are. All right, here we go. I found a question. I'm going to throw that on the screen if I can make that happen. So the question is from Marble Lion, and it says, "Hi, Cayden. I volunteer here in Massachusetts trying to fight against ICE detentions here. How has the Asian American community reacted to the increased scrutiny on their communities by the federal government?" If that is something you can speak to.
First of all, Ryan, thank you for your organizing against ICE. ICE is essentially a paramilitary wing of the U.S. government, enforcing terror against immigrant communities. What's wild is that ICE is still arresting, detaining, and deporting people right now. It's absolutely one of the things that boggles my mind, that when like literally every other court is closed, nobody can go anywhere. Healthcare workers are like, we need more personal protective equipment. ICE is using that same personal protective equipment to detain, arrest and detain folks. And I think that like, one, this speaks to kind of this like, I think the like project of our orange president to like make America white again. And also, you know, the increased scrutiny on Asian American communities is not necessarily new in this moment too. Like, you know, I Massachusetts, there are a lot of Southeast Asians who are doing a lot of great organizing against ICE, because the Southeast Asian community in particular has been hit really hard by like a double whammy of being criminalized for being poor, and also like lower access to the sort of like route to citizenship because of a lot of people's refugee status. And that was happening before the coronavirus hit. I think that like one of the things that we're seeing right now, and at least that like I'm seeing from like our network of activists, is that like people are really scrambling to like show up for each other on a very like interpersonal basis. Right now, I don't know that like there are new directives that we're aware of from ICE, but it is definitely something to think. It's just like one of those things that I'm like, this is what we're going to prioritize right now.
It's
like,
it's absolutely horrifying. Like I mean, ICE is horrifying any day of the week, but the fact that it's not like at least temporarily suspended is I can't wrap my head around it.
Yeah, it's outrageous. And I will say that I don't know about the right now times, but I will say that historically we have seen time and time again that really good organizing and mobilizing people to fight back against ICE, whether that's like trying to get community members released from detention, individuals usually, or like literally trying to stop deportations with our bodies, like that works. Like ICE responds to that. And I think that like anything that people are seeing online to like support individuals who are in ICE detention to get them out, it's really important that we do that right now, because you've probably heard that ICE detention in prisons are absolutely hotbeds for the coronavirus, and any kind of imprisonment at this point is basically a death sentence. It's really ICE detention was horrific before the coronavirus. Now it's a death sentence. We've done a bunch of work to support folks in ICE detention, especially along the southern border, who have gone on hunger strike because of the poor conditions in ICE facilities. And this has been like ongoing on and off for the past, I want to say 4 or 5 years. So a lot of this stuff, again, it's like not new. And I think that one thing that I'm seeing from a lot of commentators is them pointing out how the coronavirus has really like uncovered a lot of the like truly evil stuff going on in our society. And now more people are seeing it. And so I think it's, you know, we have an opportunity to really bring this stuff to light. And yeah, also keep up the good work, Marble Lion. I'm very grateful for your work.
Yeah, and thanks for that question, for sure. I got another one here. Down D says, I'm curious about U.S. laws that pitted Asian immigrants against each other before World War II.
I don't know that I can. super speak to this question, but I will say that like there's you can download this zine from our website. It's up. The print version is up on Gumroad. You
Great.
can download it for free. But in the first section, there is a little bit of history on the way that like forced labor, like Asian forced laborers brought to the United States were actually like pitted against the like labor of first enslaved people and then emancipated slaves as a way of like undercutting them economically. I think it's like a really good, a lot of racism is also about economics. You kind of need to understand both, like one to understand the other, and vice versa. But especially in terms of like labor brought to the United States from other countries, often the reason for that is to like undercut other people's economic opportunity. And yeah, it's like wild that like as early as the mid 1800s, Asians were brought to the United States to undercut like perceived shortcomings or the striving of like Black Americans. It's just wild that it's that old.
Yeah, something that I can't speak with any sort of confidence about, but I know I've read this in the past, is that the laws around, literally Supreme Court laws around whiteness, who was considered white and who wasn't, changed sort of like throughout time, that like made certain folks be considered white and others who aren't, but they contradicted each other constantly. And I think that those laws are another way in which communities have been pitted against each other in that drive for maintaining white supremacy and who's allowed into that group and who isn't allowed into that group.
Yeah, and actually a lot of those cases are about Asians.
Yeah. And there, I know one for sure is was about an Indian immigrant, I think. I just don't remember the time periods and the case laws around this stuff.
Yeah, this is like in the early 20th century, and I think it's Singh versus United States. Basically, this dude was like trying to argue that if the definition of whiteness, so this particular case that you're thinking of is interesting because the person bringing the suit was basically arguing that Indians are white because definitionally, if you're defining whiteness by being Caucasian, that like if you look historically at the migration of like people and culture from the actual region of the world called the Caucasus Mountains, it is arguable that people came out of like the Middle East and North Africa through the Caucasus and into India. And so basically he was trying to like claim that he was white, which is really interesting. The other case that a lot of people know about is Wong Kim Ark. And Wong Kim Ark's case, I believe, is basically about kids born in the United States to immigrant parents. And I'm trying to remember how this case went, but it's basically like the thing that Donald Trump is still like pressed about this thing where like he hates family immigration, right? Like this idea that like having a like anchor baby who's a United States citizen then like gives purchase to like some like a whole like extended family of immigrants, and that's somehow like some like devious plot by like Asian immigrants is like old. Like the Wong Kim Ark case, I want to say is like in like I want to say 1880s. Like it's old.
Yeah.
So this is again like I think a lot of times we don't necessarily realize how old these tropes are, but they're old and they're persistent.
They're super old. I was sort of laughing to myself about the Caucasian thing and the Caucasus Mountains because one, like literally Armenians are from that region, and so like it's this joke. But what I was thinking about is how in the United States being Middle Eastern is technically white. And how that makes me just laugh every time. So as I was filling out my census, because I think censuses are important, it says you have to choose your race, and it says white, and it lists like Irish, German, Lebanese, Egyptian, and I was like, oh hell no, like that is not useful for us. Like a census is useful only if it actually helps us understand the population, not like lumping people together who are not treated the same way at all, you know?
Yeah, like some of these things are not like the others.
Yeah, no, right? Like, shouldn't we have updated that? Anyways, all right. There was another question that came in that I think is, I'm going to pop the question up, but I think it's more related to sort of how to intervene. And I know we recommended the hollaback training, which I think is really good, and other sorts of interventions. But Ozoke17 said, is it reasonable to include some links or something to back up one's position? Is it useful? Do you have any links to recommend? Are there better other ways to help? And I think that question is related to like, if you do want to intervene on a Facebook thread where someone is using the very racist term Chinese virus to talk about the COVID-19 pandemic, like, do you think that like dropping links is useful? Or like, what are some strategies around actually intervening?
I find that generally people don't like the link dump.
Yeah, that was my instinct too.
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on the person that you're dealing with. Like, if you're talking about this like friend from high school or whatever who like you can actually DM and be like, dude, what the fuck? I think that creates a greater opportunity for and like an openness to reading the link dump after you've had that initial conversation. But one of the things about I think confronting people about this kind of stuff is that we're dealing with like a very old and deep-seated mythology that people have gotten from like our popular culture for a really long time. And so like that's emotional, right? And like often the link dump is about like, here's some facts. And the facts are obviously very important because like truth is important, but but racism is about feelings. And I think that like I don't know, I'm personally really interested in like the internet as an economy of feelings, like as a person who dropped out of grad school.
Oh, congratulations.
Also,
I should have done that.
Achievement unlocked. But yeah, so my thought there is also thinking about like, how do you kind of like disarm the knee-jerk reaction to being called a racist, right? Because that's what people are going to hear when you call them out on it. And a lot of it kind of depends on the context, but figuring out how to disarm people's like emotional reaction to that is like a really fine art. And it takes practice. It's not going to work every time.
Yeah.
And it's cool if it doesn't. And sometimes you do that call out too on a public thread, not for the person who said it, but for everybody else who's observing that thread.
Yeah, totally. All of that. I think that the art of the call out is a very delicate art that you will never master, but that you can pick up tips along the way that you realize, oh, that didn't work or that did. And I think that that last point you made is really crucial here, is there's a difference between like, are you trying to change an individual's mind and behavior, or are you trying to call out the behavior for the purposes of an audience? And I think those are very different approaches, like the public shaming approach. That's a whole, I'm going to just caveat that because that's a whole thing that is a much more complicated conversation to have than we can right now. But, I think that like sometimes you might want to take someone aside, like you were saying, in a DM and be like, hey, that's not really cool. Like, can we talk about the fact that that's not cool? Or that made me kind of uncomfortable, versus like, just being like, fuck you, that's terrible. The other thing I wanted to bring out, and what Cayden, I think you were definitely getting at, is that facts are important and they matter, but facts don't change minds. They do not. That is not how psychology of humans work. And so when you do, in my experience, when you do want to get someone to consider their words and their behavior, understand that you're just planting a seed, right? Understand that you are giving them some tools to start thinking about this issue, and they might hate you for it. They might yell at you. They might think that
unfriend you.
They might unfriend you. You might never talk to them again. But that maybe down the road, they will remember that conversation, or maybe down the road something else will happen that will trigger them thinking about, oh, right, that one time I did that thing was bad. Let me learn more, or what have you, right? So, I feel like when we talk about interventions, it can be a little bit tricky, and that we need to put aside the instant gratification of like winning the argument, and realizing that, there are different ways to do it, and that you might be starting a conversation that you won't be a part of the end of,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I think having links on hand to information is really important for that like larger audience situation. Because like I can't tell you the number of times I've been in conversations on the internet where somebody like I got in a fight on like a friend's Facebook wall or something with some ignorant person that they know from like, some other part of their life. And then some other person I don't know pops in and is like, I want to know more about that, and like, what is that thing when one door opens another, or when one door closes another one opens? Very true on the internet.
And sometimes so this is not related to specifically calling out the racist terminologies for the COVID-19 virus, but like there are some things that I've dealt with for years and will continue to deal with, and I just have my like quippy ways of responding that have kind of worked for me, that I've turned into like, because sometimes you don't want to like kill the mood of a space. So like, I have a problem with people using the word guys to talk about a mixed gender group or environment. So I'll just be like, not a guy, kind of like the not a girl from Good Place. And then they either will immediately correct or be like, what? Or if people are referring to adult women as girls, they'll be like, oh, is she 12? And there's usually just like a, huh? Oh, no, yeah, woman, right? So like there's ways that you can learn to intervene. And those are obviously more lighthearted examples than what we're actually talking about. But just to give you some examples of possibilities in these spaces. We don't have a ton more time, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about a larger political action here. That, we're talking about personal interventions, sort of one-on-one. We're talking about a very specific moment in time, but this is as you have very well explained, a very historical problem that is going to go into the future. It's not going to end here. So if you want to just speak a little bit about like, what does that future look like? Things we'll do to help work towards really developing some systemic change.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I love systemic change.
Love it. It's the best.
Put it on a bumper sticker and stick it on my truck. So right now, there isn't necessarily a lot of policy response happening. And I think that's largely because, a lot of legislatures are not in session. People are really struggling just to figure out how to like live day to day. But that is going to change eventually. There are some things that we're keeping our eye on and that, are worth bringing up for y'all. One is, harkening back to this question about ICE, is the potential for increased profiling of Asian Americans and Asian Brits. And, we don't know how that's going to look yet, but we know that like, our national security apparatus is like full of like really messed up like monitoring stuff already. I think there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from what happened to Muslims and people who are perceived to be Muslims in the years after 9/11, right? Like that intensification of the security state, like it will not be shocking if like once Congress is back in session, people keep trying to do that. I think like the sort of like frivolous and stupid legislation that some lawmakers are introducing, allowing private citizens to sue the Chinese government, like those things are not going anywhere, but they signal something, right? Like Senator Marsha Blackburn just announced that she is introducing a bill that will allow private U.S. citizens to sue the Chinese government, and I'm like, that's not going to happen, but like it is. I think it is a portent of things to come. The thing related to that is we've already been before coronavirus in some conflict with the Chinese government. Um, and one of the things that I've been thinking and kind of worried about is like increasingly China has like economic and political interest in East Africa. And while I think it's really unlikely that we go directly to war with China, it's very likely that we get into like hot proxy wars with China and other parts of the world. So like being intentionally and thoughtfully anti-war right now is like probably, figuring out what that looks like in the political moment is really relevant. Like I am very concerned about sort of entering into like kind of like new Cold War kind of situation. And if you're a student of history, the Cold War wasn't cold; it was also hot in a lot of places.
I'm sorry. That was so cheesy. I'm into it. I'm very into it. Very accurate. All right, cool.
I mean, one more thing.
Yeah, please.
I not forget about is that like social media platforms have been really committed in spreading information about China and in general. Things that work the other media just oriented organizations on is calling on specifically like YouTube and Twitter, which happen to be the worst at this, to take more seriously curtailing the spread of disinformation. The thing about disinformation is like once it gets out, it's hard to fact check. A lot of it's like not falsifiable, but cutting it off at the source is actually really important. And for public health is important for like the physical safety of people who might be the victims of racist attacks. It's important for heading off a lot of this bad policy that like I think I'm going to we're not yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't get me started social. Yeah, okay. A really quick recap here. Something you can do is call out racist comments about COVID, especially those being called the Chinese virus. Do a bystander intervention training. Keep yourself updated on how that can work. Hollaback is doing a great one. We recommend checking that out. Create your pod map. So who you call in emergency, your people, your ride or dies, as Cayden said. Shop at Asian grocery stores and markets and order food from Asian restaurants. Understand, work towards some things being intentionally anti-war. Understand social media has been committed in spreading this misinformation and like putting pressure on them to do better and be better. Cayden, you are delightful and wonderful, and I love the work you're doing. Thank you so much for us today. How can folks find out more about 18 Million Rising and the zine and ways that they can get involved with your work?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was super fun. We're on all of your social medias. Instagram is actually where it's at right now, making the most fire Instagram content. We're at 18 Million Rising on Instagram, on Twitter. We're on Facebook and also on Tumblr. So come check us out wherever you stay social. We put all of our actions there. And I'm on Twitter at Cayden, just my first. If you want to chat more about stuff, I am happy to talk.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So also, just in fact, 18 Million Rising is a nonprofit, so if you want to throw some money their way, feel free to do that. I'm also asking money, just so much money that is needed in the world, and it's not. My God, it's almost over. I only need to say words for a few more minutes. I'm just thinking about how in the nonprofit space, sometimes it feels like there's a scarcity of resources and that we're fighting each other for these things. And I really want to just encourage us to think about the fact that we are all doing collective work and trying to make the world better and using different ways of doing that. And we can really come together. And these are moments in which we remember that. So, shout out, support 18 Rising, support us as well. So Games Hotline is a free source. It will be when it launches very soon. If you want to keep it, we're actually in the middle of a big group fundraiser where a bunch of nonprofits in the video game space specifically that are working to promote mental health support or diversity or inclusivity or all of the above are trying to make it through this really difficult time. So if you want to support them, the campaign is running until May 21st, and you can pitch in at givebutter.com/stayinthegame. And if you can't pitch in, or even if you can, please help us spread the word on that. It would mean the world to us. So I want to thank all of our mods for keeping this space friendly and wonderful. I want to thank all of you with your question and caring about these important issues. And you can watch the videos anytime at the Games Hotline YouTube channel or any of our other episodes. So Join me next week when we talk to Madeline Woods, the founder of Hello Weldon, about working from home and accountability and productivity or not productivity, depending on how you want to get that. So, everyone, thanks, Cayden.